amassed over 3 centuries, since the days when the Dutch were the rulers of this much colonized island. Within these walls, the Dutch stored this piece of paper, which must have been classified as top secret. It's a treaty they signed with the local rulers. In the version the Dutch made public, they agreed to destroy all the forts in the island. But in this one, which was for Dutch eyes only, there's no mention of any such promise. And the Dutch, of course, held on to the forts and to power. We've only to read both versions of this treaty to find the truth of the matter. But all over the world, there are writings, inscriptions, coded communications, mysterious maps, and weird manuscripts which have fascinated, obsessed, and usually frustrated the experts who have tried to crack their secrets.
In this fairy tale castle deep in the forests of southern Germany, Kirsten Siever hopes to find the key to the world's most controversial map. But across the Atlantic in Washington, D.C., Dr. Bob McGee contests her solution to the mystery. They disagree over this piece of parchment known as the Vinland map. It's claimed to be the first documentary proof that the Vikings discovered America. In the far west, this scrap of land can only be North America. Its outline matches the Newfoundland coast. But the map has been dated to 1440, 50 years before Columbus set sail. In the top left-hand corner, an inscription says that the map is based on information passed down from Viking explorers. On Columbus Day 1965, Yale University announced it had bought the map. An outcry ensued. From the first, there were those who doubted the map's authenticity and demanded to know its history. But this man, Lawrence Witten, who sold the map to Yale, would not explain where it came from. Tests proved the parchment was medieval, but scientists disagree about the age of the ink. Archaeologist Bob McGee rests his case on historical facts. He believes the map may well be genuine.
Well, the Norse were quite expert at navigating east-west across the Atlantic along single lines of latitude. So the latitude of locations would be the type of information which we can see being very carefully passed on to later generations of sailors. And this information would have been available to European map makers of the time. And if we look at the latitudes of the Vinland configuration on this map and compare them with those of Europe, it's quite remarkable how they do line up. If we look at the southern tip of Vinland and go across to Europe, we come to Brittany, or the northern end of the Bay of Biscay here. And if we look at a modern map across here, from the northern end of the Bay of Biscay and go west, we find that it matches almost exactly the southern tip of Newfoundland. Now, the northern tip of Newfoundland matches with about the south coast of Ireland. And if we go back to the Vinland map and look at this first big inlet and measure across to Europe, we find that it matches with the south coast of Ireland. So this configuration from Bay of Biscay up to the south coast of Ireland correlates very nicely with the island of Newfoundland.
It's known that the Vikings did reach North America. In the 1960s, archaeologists found the remains of their settlement. To McGee, the dates are everything.
Now, if a forger had drawn this map back in the 1920s or 1930s and wanted the latitudes to match up with what they thought at that time the Norse had known, the island of Vinland would have been placed much further south, because it was fairly commonly accepted that Vinland would have been somewhere down Cape Cod, the mid-Atlantic states perhaps, whereas since that time, all archaeological evidence and most scholarly evidence now concludes that Vinland must have been the island of Newfoundland or the Gulf of St. Lawrence, well north of where it used to be thought to be and exactly where it is shown on the Vinland map.
McGee's theories are thought small beer in Bavaria. Kirsten Siever is quite sure that the map is a fake.
It would be like the virgin birth. It has no tradition behind it. It has no reality around it. It cannot be.
Siever is convinced she knows who forged the Vinland map, a Jesuit priest who died here at Wolfegg Castle. Only he fitted the profile of the forger.
The person had to be interested in maps. Secondly, he or she had to be fluent in Latin. Thirdly, the person had to know where all the bones of contention lay buried when it came to the Vinland voyages.
In the 1930s, Father Joseph Fisher was a world expert on maps. He devoted his days to teaching history until the Nazis closed his college. Taken under the wing of Wolfegg's prince and princess, he spent his last years in the bosom of their family. He left some vital clues.
Here at Wolfegg Castle, they have many of Father Fisher's letters. His handwriting is, of course, of great interest if we want to pin the Vinland map on him. As you can see, it's a very impatient handwriting with a very characteristic D, like that. It's full of strong lateral strokes. The D that you see in this letter is so similar to the D that you see in this map that, for starters, it is an interesting coincidence. You will also see that he writes on paper with line guides. The more tidily written legends, such as the one at Vinland, are written with a line guide exactly 2 millimeters apart. That is not a medieval form. Father Fisher would not have thought that it was wrong to make such a map, because he was convinced that such a map in some form had existed. I believe he decided to fill in the gap. Essentially, he made the map he'd been looking for all his life.
I'd like to see a solution to the mystery of the Vinland map. It's more important than simply deciding whether a university wasted good money on a fake. If it's genuine, the map would banish myths and illusions of geographical history. It would not only show how much of America the ancient Norse explored, it might also mean that Christopher Columbus didn't come across the New World by chance, but actually knew where he was going. But perhaps there's another answer to the mystery of how far the ancient Norse explorers penetrated America. It's to be found in a weird inscription which brings the tourists from far and wide to a small town in Minnesota.
Alexandria cherishes its links with Scandinavia. It's where, in the 19th century, many immigrant Swedes made their home. The town's museum boasts an extraordinary tourist attraction. This stone slab is covered with runes, the lettering of the ancient Norse. Translated, it says that a party of Vikings were attacked by Indians and forced to flee to their longboats. The date carved into the stone is 1362. The people of Alexandria have a proud boast. They believe the Vikings visited their hometown and left their calling card.
I will show you the rune stone that was found near Kensington, Minnesota. It proves that the Vikings were here.
The stone was found in 1898 by a Swedish immigrant called Olaf Åhman. He said he found the slab buried in the roots of a tree. The discovery brought fame to the Åhman family, but some people doubted the story of the find. They suggested it was Åhman's own work. The Åhman farm where the runestone was found is preserved for posterity by the town. Grandson, Lallard Kolberg, won't hear a word against Olaf Åhman.
My grandfather was an honest man, and he was a hard-working man. The Kensington runestone is a true Viking stone found by my grandfather on the Åhman farm. And it would be to add that my grandmother was a very religious person, so they can't say that my grandfather made that stone. There's no way, because he was not educated enough to do things like that.
Einar Backer remembers Åhman from childhood.
Well, he was a real honest man as far as I'm concerned. He wasn't for practical jokes of any kind, I'm sure he would not sit and carve a rock like that. I'm positive it was genuine as far as woman was concerned.
But in Lanso Meadows, Newfoundland, where it's known the Vikings landed, Norse expert Birgitta Wallace is sceptical of Oman's claims. With the help of stonemason Nathaniel Patey, she is conducting a runic test.
When I first saw the Kensington runestone, one thing that struck me as very unusual was the very, very long inscription. Normally, a runestone only says, so-and-so erected this stone in memory of so-and-so. But that's it. When I saw that the runes were cut into a weathered surface, but the runes themselves had not weathered, it suggested to me immediately that they were quite recent. Rune marks, as we know them from Scandinavia, were all done with a pick hammer that makes a U-shaped, much more uneven cross-section. But this was a very clear, straight, V-shaped cut.
Birgitta suspected the runes were carved with a modern chisel.
So I went and got one, and lo and behold, they fit perfectly in size. All the upright ones had been made with a regular North American 1-inch chisel.
Birgitta's research in Sweden uncovered secrets from Oman's past. They strengthened the case against him.
Olof Åman has been portrayed as a simple and rather dumb farmer who couldn't even in his wildest dreams have thought of something like a runestone. But he was very interested in history and read very deep philosophical things. He wrote poetry, and a very little known fact is that Olof Åman was not a farmer to begin with. He was a stonemason. I think that the Kensington stone is proof not that the Vikings went to Minnesota, but that Minnesota had a very large Scandinavian immigrant population in the 19th century.
When you're dealing with the runes, it's always wise to be wary. In 1953, Swedish experts announced they'd found an inscription dating back almost 1,000 years. But the translation soon revealed a very different story. The message actually read, Joe Dokes went east, 1953. He discovered Europe. Holy smoke.
In the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, there may be gold. Coded clues left in 1822 by a man called Thomas Beale have drawn hundreds of treasure hunters to Bedford County. Albert Atwell believes his detector can find precious metals buried deep underground.
I've come here looking for the Beale treasure 148 times in the last 6 years, and I've hunted all 4 different directions, and I've tried to break the codes, try to locate the treasure by it. So maybe one day we'll find it. I'm going to keep looking for it in my spare time, practically every weekend or at least 5 times a summer, because I still believe it's here. It's going to be found.
Albert is not the only treasure hunter. Sergeant Cooper of the Sheriff's Department knows this only too well.
Beale treasure is a nuisance, and it's part of our job, you know, just more or less take care of the complaints. One man called in that someone had dug 6 or 7 holes on his property. There was another incident where a man called that someone dug where his cattle was at. If the cows would have fell in it, he would have lost some cows. And there was one incident where they was digging up a cemetery at a local church. I arrested a man and a woman, plus this small dog. I had to put in the dog pound.
In the early 1800s, Thomas Beale is said to have found gold, silver and precious jewels on a trip out west. 3 ciphers tell where he hid the treasure in his native Virginia. The seemingly incomprehensible lists of numbers are thought to say where it's buried, somewhere in these hills. Code breaking has become a community hobby. Farmer Jimmy Luck thinks he might have the answer.
I've been working with a Cheyenne Indian from Colorado for a good many years, and he deciphered the code, and all the information we get of the code we have found, and it has led us to a certain spot to where we think the treasure is buried. We are 90% sure, maybe a little more, that we're in the right spot.
All Jimmy needs now is the landowner's permission to dig.
It is really frustrating to know where it is and not have your hands on it, because after the years you've worked on it and tried so hard to find it, and you think you've come up with it, and then somebody just cuts you off from it. We'll keep on working to find the treasure as long as we're here. I think someday we'll be able to dig at the place we think the treasure's buried at and come up with the gold.
Beale's cryptic ciphers have been scrutinized by one of the world's leading experts and writers on code breaking. Dr. Stephen Matthias has tried to put himself in the mind of Thomas Beale. He believes he knows how the cipher was concocted.
The key that I have come up with is a 10 by 10 key. The alphabet in this key consists of letters, some syllables, some words and common phrases that would have appeared in Beale's messages.
Matthias admits that his key depends on intelligent guesswork, his code-breaking experience, and common sense. After much trial and error, he believes he's on the right track.
So, for example, the number 21 refers to the letter in row number 2 and column number 1, which is the letter T. Number 17 refers to the letter A that appears in row 1 and column 7. And if you continue in this manner and decipher each of the numbers, you get a message that reads, "Take the road to Finn Castle. The vault is beneath a big round stone with the initials TJB."
But Matthias's ingenious work may yet be in vain. The Beale ciphers could be a hoax.
If Beale ever existed, and if the treasure ever existed, I feel confident that the solution method that I am proposing will be the method shown to lead to an actual decipherment of paper number 1, and will be the basis for leading to the treasure.
Some can't afford to wait. Albert has hired a backhoe.
We're hopeful that the Beale treasure could be right here. More than likely it is here. We have to dig and find out. If I don't find it here today, we'll go back to work on the codes and buy better equipment and hunt somewhere else. I'm never going to give up hunting for the treasure until somebody finds it or I do.
At Yale University, one building stands out from all the rest. The Voynich Library is a forbidding place. Susan Santiris knows it well.
This library does mean a lot to me. As a child, I came here and saw all the books. Of course, you couldn't touch anything or breathe in there. And then as an undergraduate student, I spent hours and hours of my life, I still remember every one of them, poring over a particular manuscript that was there and trying to make some sense of it.
The Voynich Manuscript is an exquisite book first heard of in Prague in the 1600s. The writing seems unintelligible, but the weird illustrations point relentlessly to a hidden meaning. Theories include a medieval herbal guide, an astrological handbook, or even the elusive recipe for the elixir of life. Only one man has claimed to be close to the answer. Robert Brumbaugh was a classics professor at Yale. He died in 1992, but his fascination with the Voynich lives on in his children Robert and Susan. They find it hard to leave their father's notes untouched.
Well, the first thing that hits you when you see it is it should be something that you could just pick up and read with just a bit more effort. The illustrations are beautiful and vivid. There's a combination of scientific work and there's a humor to it that's very arresting.
Together, Susan and her father identified 14 distinct characters in the Voynich. Some seemed close to our own writing, others quite strange. Brumbaugh's inspiration was to use numbers to translate the manuscript. With Robert, he began to construct a key.
Father tried several possible arrangements, came out with this one, which turned out to work the best. Now, in this box, you see that one number represents any one of these 3 letters.
Matching numbers to the Voynich characters was much more difficult, but the family had a stroke of luck.
One of the most important clues helping to match the characters in the manuscript with numerical values is a set of marginal notes on one of the folios of the manuscript that appear to be arithmetic problems.
The discovery of these equations was a watershed. Brumbaugh used them to help confirm his suspicions. He thought he could now understand some of the Voynich characters and fill in his code-breaking key. He tested his ideas on the lettering beside one of his favourite pictures.
If you take the letters that are in here, or the squiggles, the scrawls, they look like this. Pi, A, 2. Each one of those being a distinct form. If you then ascribe to them the numerical values that appeared on the chart that my father developed, you have 7, 5, 7, 7, 5, 2. One of the possible readings of it, the only one, is pepper. And interestingly enough, this actually looks very much like a pepper. My father had a feeling that he could read more and more of it, but it remained slow going. He read bits and pieces here and there. He read labels. He read some of the star maps. Then he began reading pages, but as he went, some of it was almost distressing in its ambiguity, because toward the end of some pages, he thought that perhaps the author lapsed into a kind of gibberish. Does that mean that perhaps the code needed adjusting, or that the author was performing a major hoax on the reader?
We've deciphered enough to show that underneath is a very heavily padded or repetitive message, which either conceals a second level message or perhaps doesn't conceal anything.
The mysteries in this program show the extraordinary lengths to which people will go when they want to keep secrets. And we've even more secrets to keep today, as we exchange information by computers, telephone lines, and satellites. The more we need uncrackable codes to make sure that our messages are read only by the people they're sent to. So these puzzles from the past may one day help to guide us on the information superhighway.